Boy, am I excited to be able to interview right now Rabbi Daniel Lapin. And he was so kind to join us on this show. And you guys, I'm telling you right now, we could talk with him about half a dozen subjects you would eat up, because his passion is on family and on finance. And yet we met because he is a remarkable expositor on the dilemma that, I work with all the time now, which is the saving of Western civilization. Rabbi, I was at a conference yesterday. Everyone had to write down what their big mission was in life. And it was all businessmen, and they all had this goal. And the only thing that I had was this audacious statement: saving Western civilization. And of course, obviously, that's not my ability, but it's my passion. And I heard you, and I met you at an event in Washington, D.C., where you were articulating the great issue of what's going on in the meta narrative over the culture. And while I want to go into your best-selling book here on Thou Shalt Prosper, which you're going to talk about in San Diego at the Extreme Dream Trip, tell me about your observation regarding what's happening in the American culture across the board right now. And as a man of God, what's your framework for this? And what's your main perspective in terms of simplifying this complex dissolving of culture that we're watching all over the place?
Well, let me just practice unaccustomed modesty here and just clarify the term man of God. I'm not worthy of that term, I can assure you. I am very much a man of this world. I'm a man of 12-cylinder cars and a beautiful wife and beautiful daughters, and probably I'm a rabbi who may have enjoyed one outstanding meal too many. So I won't go with a man of God bit.
Okay. Well, just know that in our Pentecostal circles, we throw that around liberally, and it doesn't.
Okay, all right. I shall be ready for that. It'll be lucky if by the end of our fantastic San Diego event, I don't walk away with a little bit of a burnished halo here. But I mean, I share your passion, obviously, and I think the key question is, I think one of the most profound and baffling mysteries about everything that's going on now, imperiling the West as it is this bizarre alliance between radical Islam and Western secular fundamentalism. In other words, the left-leaning establishments in the United Kingdom, in the European Union, in Canada, and obviously in the United States of America, actually believe, Dr. Wallnau, that the Islamic world is not nearly as much of a threat as you and I are. In other words, the left views Bible-based Judeo-Christian belief as the real problem. They don't see Islamism, and worse than that, they lean over backwards to accommodate Islam, whereas they declare open season on Bible-believing Christians all the time. I've felt, and I've said this for a long time, that the last unprotected demographic group in America is Bible-believing Christians. It's like open season. Now, the only way that all of this makes any sense is to recognize something which is profoundly disturbing to the left. Now, in case you got the impression that my paths are the paths of righteousness and my ways are the ways of peace, and I'm awfully careful not to ever offend anybody, I can assure you that is simply not the case. I try not to offend inadvertently, but I offend deliberately all the time. And the reason for that is that you being offended at something I say is no indictment of what I said. It may be an indictment of your thin skin. So today, anytime somebody doesn't like what you say, I'm offended at what you've said. The only right answer to that is, who cares? So what? And so let me be deliberately offensive here and say that what we think of as Western civilization is nothing other than the system of social organization and government that sprang from the pages of the monumental volume that has shaped the history of the world called the Bible. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
About 5,000 cultures around the world. There is only one civilization. It is not an accident that everybody who's drowned on small boats in the Mediterranean in the last 5 years were all moving from Africa to Europe. None of them were moving from Europe to Africa. This is not a two-way journey. Everybody recognizes that Judeo-Christian Western civilization is superior to every other culture around the world. That's why people are voting with their feet.
And I have to tell you that just amplifies the irony that of how the left goes out of its way in the universities to deconstruct America so that we become the great global villain.
Yeah, of course.
And the colonialist empire that has to expunge itself from its own history and founding fathers because of the iniquities of our past. Right. And it's completely incongruent with the reality that the Western civilization has offered the highest standard of freedom and health and prosperity in all the world, and there's a reason why.
Well, that's the paradox. The paradox is that they want to benefit from that. There are not a lot of secular fundamentalists in the United States trying to illegally get through the borders of Somalia and Saudi Arabia. No one is trying to relocate to those countries. So they're very comfortable living here, preferably on the salary of a tenured university professor. They're not moving anywhere, but they hate the system, and they hate the system because the essential philosophy that sculpts their entire worldview is secularism. It's an insane.
And you introduced the term to me, which I've used and given you credit for it whenever I remember to, and that's secular fundamentalists. Because
that's right. Yes.
It really is. It's a form of religious thinking that has its own priesthood, and its own priesthood is officiating in many cases at the gates of academia. And yes. You were just telling me you weren't able to speak at a college recently. I mean, this is outrageous when you think of it.
Well, it really makes perfect sense if you realize that that the left is essentially a belief system. It's a belief system founded on secularism. So, in other words, if somebody tells me that, or let me put it this way, here is the seminal question. That if you answer this question for me, I have a pretty good idea of how you feel about money, how you feel about marriage, how you feel about wealth, how you feel about government, how you feel about taxation, and I'll have a 95% accuracy rate. The question is, do you believe that God gave his message to mankind through Moses on Mount Sinai 3,000 years ago? It's as simple as that. And if your answer to that is either no, or by the way, you might answer, well, it depends, that equals no, I got it. You don't have to worry about that. Then I already know. I know how you feel about government. I know how you feel about the private sector. I know how you feel about the importance of marriage and family. I've got it all down. It's very, very clear. Wow. Because everything flows from that essential, fundamental belief system. And that's really all we have to know. Now, it's not an accident that they all turn to socialism. Haven't you wondered how it is that Bernie Sanders is just one comical aspect of it, but the whole movement is filled with clowns and creeps and crooks and cranks, every one of them, and they're devoted to socialism. But they are coining it like crazy. Oh, they're perfectly happy collecting the money themselves. Sure. Well, they have to be devoted to socialism because they know, as well as you and I know, that there has never been a successful attempt to divorce the monumental power of the wealth creation potential of the United States of America from its biblical foundations. There has never been a religious culture that has been an absolute basket case. When I say a religious culture, I'm talking Judeo-Christian. Obviously, it goes without saying that Muslim culture hasn't figured out how to build a bicycle factory, let alone a chip fabrication plant. But if you take a look at the countries in which capital markets arose indigenously, they were all Judeo-Christian countries, every single one of them. The capital markets of London and Amsterdam were the beginning of it all. Now, today we have stock markets in Accra and Beijing and everywhere else. But in terms of where they arose originally, only in countries of belief, for the same reason that the overwhelming majority of scientific discoveries, medical discoveries, inventions between the year 1700 and 1900, those 1200 years, all 99%, actually 98.7% took place and occurred in Christian countries. That's not an accident. The system of human organization and societal organization that God gave us in the Bible works. It's not another system. It's the only system.
It's amazing. And I could, this could be a subject all unto itself, because our audience eats this up. This is what we talk about. And in fact, I wrote a book, speaking of this, and I think it sold about close to like 90,000 copies. So it's God's Chaos Candidate. And it was before the election.
You were the first person. You were the first person who understood that Donald Trump was not about what he said; it was about what he did. And you were exactly right. You pulled that one in. You called it precisely.
Yeah, and I'm feeling as though, as we're going to 2020, we have an education task, because the real defenders of those Judeo-Christian values are on their heels, because they're not inclined to want to engage controversy. They don't realize how serious the threat is. And for the most part, we've created a subculture of engagement in my community, where we have our own Christian television or our own churches and our own schools or homeschools, and haven't realized that the left doesn't have a vision that includes us in their future. Correct. And they're not going to respect the right of us to be able to coexist unless we can bow the knee to Baal and affirm their beliefs.
Look, the two areas they will never yield on. I believe you're 100% correct. The two areas that they will do whatever it takes to silence us is sex and money. In other words, abortion and homosexuality. The goal is to be able to imprison people for speaking in favor of traditional biblical morality, and to silence people who speak in terms of the essential dignity and morality of the free market.
Well, let's go there now, because this is interesting to me. I've always felt that, and it may be an assumption, it's wrong, but I've always felt that ever since I saw the data on Nobel Prizes that were won by Jewish researchers, and came up with like 2,000% higher participation by Israelis or by Jews in that field of science and achievement, I said, that's such a disproportionate representation. There may be a relationship between that statistic and the fact that that we, as loving Abraham, we really believe that part of the blessing of Abraham is to be the head and not the tail, above and not beneath, and that includes socioeconomic influence.
Yes.
And you go right there and talk about it here. So let's talk about that for a moment. Money, and what is the unique contribution of the Jewish and Hebrew perspective regarding wealth?
Well, first of all, it's a recognized reality that within any region, the gross domestic product of a region is proportional to the population. So we can look at national populations on the eve of World War II. And once you recognize the significance of population and you recognize the necessity of a an economy to wage a war, you can really understand the course of events in the middle of the 20th century in Europe. In the United States, for instance, the state of Georgia has about 8 times the population of Rhode Island.
Right.
And if you expected the gross domestic product of Georgia to be 8 times the GDP of Rhode Island, you'd be exactly right. Now, in the Middle East, you've got Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon are the 4 contiguous Arab countries surrounding Israel. They have a total of about 100 million people. Israel has around about 5 million people. So naturally, you would expect the GDP of those 4 Arab countries in aggregate to be about 20 times the GDP of Israel. Oddly enough, they're exactly the same. So Israel is outperforming by a factor of 20 everyone else in that region. It's also true that the annual Forbes list of the 400 richest Americans, if we look at the demographics of Jews in America, about 2%, a little over 2% of the population, you'd expect to see 8 or 9 Jews on the Forbes 400 list. And in fact, what we really get is between 60 and 100, a hugely disproportionate representation. Now, it doesn't mean there are no poor Jews, of course, but it does mean that Jews are disproportionately good with money. It's something that has been recognized by, venerable, sagely writers and dastardly politicians like Adolf Hitler. Everybody's recognized that the people of Israel are extraordinarily and disproportionately good with money. Mark Twain wrote a wonderful piece concerning the Jews, and he's today he would be
right
lambasted as insensitive and bigoted.
He'd be shadow banned.
Yes, exactly. But what he said was perfectly obvious, which is that not only in America but in European countries, there are very often entire industries and entire sections of commerce that are in the hands of the people of Israel. What's that all about? So I spent about 10 years researching that, because I knew that if anybody other than a Jew answered that question, ideally a Jewish rabbi like me, if anyone else tried to answer that question, they would quickly be condemned as bigoted. So I knew it was something that I had to do. And that book, Thou Shalt Prosper, along with some other books I've written on the topic, is the result of that. And my concern was, is this something unique to Jews? If so, it's useless and of no interest to anybody else. Is it genetic to Jews? I had to explore that possibility. It was not hard to debunk a nonsensical theory like that. Is it that you have to be circumcised? I mean, if that's the case, many men would prefer poverty. So, what is it? Is it something that has to do with the food we eat? No, it turns out to be a collection of nearly 1,000 tips and tools and techniques that are embedded in the Hebrew scripture. And it was my job to condense those into usable strategies that could be simply applied by anybody of any background or no background. And so that book is the result of that. And it's essentially understanding exactly what it is that Jews deploy for financial effectiveness and how anybody can do exactly the same thing. And what is more, should do the same thing, because the more that people do that, the more God smiles.
Well, let's talk about one of the principles that you got, because on this extreme dream trip, we're going to be talking about relationships.
Absolutely.
And that's one of your chapters in the book, which I think is brilliant, about the perspective of how those relationships form the connections that extend the network of your connectedness to many people. How does that work in terms of prosperity?
Well, it's let's see. The best place, I think, to start there is we have to explore what money actually is. And we have to abandon the various definitions given on college campuses in Econ 101 means of exchange, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's all very nice. But in real terms, money is very simple. And the best way to illustrate that, I think, is by an example. When I say that, let's imagine my trade is roofing, and somebody asked me to come over and roof their kitchen. The guy's all upset. The rain's coming into the kitchen. His wife's upset. I jump in my truck. I head on over. I was going to take my kids to a sporting event, but I realized much more valuable for them to be with me while I do my work than for me to be with them at some dumb sporting event. It's not nearly as important. I say, come, we are now going to go and please another one of God's children. And that, I think you'll agree, is much more important than going to watch you or somebody else throw a ball around a field.
Right.
So we set up the ladder, we get the tools out, we go up. My older children help me. The younger children pass me things and watch. At the end of it, the job is done. And the guy comes over, shakes my hand and says, "Oh, I am so happy you did this. You don't know how miserable it is when rain starts coming through into your kitchen." And his wife was dancing around the kitchen saying, it's dry, it's dry. And I said to the kids, you see how lovely this is. We have pleased another one of God's children. And they said, come, Daddy, let's go home. We're finished. I said, no, we haven't. We haven't, because I need to obtain proof of performance. I need proof that I pleased another one of God's children. They said, what are you talking about? I said, well, you watch now what this man whose roof I fixed, you watch what he does. He came over to me and he pulled out a roll of green strips of paper. And he said, so how many of these certificates of performance would you like? And I said, I need 100 of those. And he said, fantastic. And he peels off 100 and gives them to me. And I say to the kids, now this is good, because now I've got proof that I pleased another one of God's children. And they said, well, what's the idea? I said, well, you watch this. I said, on the way home, who'd like to get some hamburgers? Everyone, me. All right. So we go over to the local the kosher hamburger store, and we get hamburgers. And at the end of it, the chef or the owner of the restaurant says, I'll need some certificates of performance from you, because this restaurant is a special restaurant for people of a certain club. This restaurant is only for people who please God's other children. I said, oh, you don't have to worry about me. I'm right there in that paper. He said, can you prove it? I said, sure, I've got certificates of performance. How many do you need? He said, I need 60 certificates of performance. I peel off 60, I give them to him, and he smiles, I smile, and away we go. That is what money does. It's what money is. It proves that I served another human being. That's all it is. It's
wow.
As that. And therefore, relationships become hugely important.
And the network and the connections of those relationships, and you give some great advice on improving your capacity by finding those relationships that are above you, where you really want to go, and then finding out, curiously enough, how to serve them and not manipulate them, because people do have sense. And you talk about different politicians and people you've met in your life who
yes.
were reading the room to see how they could increase the leverage of their work in the handshake to somebody else. And you could sense it, can't you?
Absolutely, every single time. And in many ways, we have or can have a bad habit of adulterating our relationships. In other words, the seventh commandment is not only don't commit adultery with respect to your wife or someone else's wife, it's also about preserving a uniqueness in every one of our relationships. How I treat my wife is entirely different from how I treat any other woman on the planet. And if I am talking to a client of my coaching business, then I'm going to speak uniquely to that client. And if he hears me using exactly the same language and the same sales spiel and the same promotional verbiage that I used on the last person I spoke to, he'd be right to run away from me and have nothing more to do with me because I'm only treating him as a commodity.
Wow. I love this. This is all, I mean, we're going to be able to cover a lot of this and more. I'm going to give the address here for the Extreme Dream Trip. Let's see if I can get it up there. And once again,
I think we're planning, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, our goal, I think, is for people to go away from Paradise Point at the end of the event carrying a set of new arrows in their quiver, new tools and techniques that they can deploy in their lives having to do with relationships, both family-wise and finance.
You nailed it. And it's going to be, you've got the 10 commandments for making money as much as you can. We could go in there, and we're going to have a Q&A time with you, which you've been very kind to allow us.
Sure.
So people can customize their questions with specificity and say, can you explain this and can you explain that? And I think we're going to see a tremendous transformation, because it seems like there's certain timing in people's lives. And a lot of my audience is what I look at in terms of like executive coaching as a period of life called convergence. It's almost like God's calendar. When you're north of 50, your life lessons are all now instructive, and it's almost like your biggest days. And this is a fact that most of the big earnings that happen in people's lives aren't happening in the first 50 years. It's happening north of that. That's when you're earning it. So now's the time when I really feel relationships and understanding money, as well as getting the cultural context, which is especially powerful, of what the world is like now. And by the way, because there are unique pressures that are being shaped by current events, there are also unique opportunities.
Of course.
There's a great verse in Hebrews that I think many times apocalyptic teachers miss, and it says, "Yet once more hath God promised that he will shake not only the heavens but the earth." And I think we've been quoting the Old Testament in Zechariah and different prophets. There's a shaking that's happening culturally, it's happening globally to the foundations of what we believe. But with it, there's a promise that that which is unshakable will be made manifest. And the principles you're talking about, the commandments that have been given to us, are actually not just moral platitudes. They are, in a sense, they're strategies to build with that which will not be shaken. And I think that your being there is going to really help us to grab these things and pull it together. How in the world will you know which of these chapters to focus on? Do not pursue perfection. Constantly change the changeable while steadfastly clinging to the unchangeable. Learn to foretell the future. Just real quick, what is that all about? Learn to foretell the future.
Well, that has to do with the fact that, when just before he died, at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses blessed all the tribes, right? And he spends an entire chapter doing that. And what's interesting is that, you would have thought that, I mean, if I would have written this book, I would have saved ink. I would have said something like, and Moses got up, told the people of Israel, you've all been a giant pain in the neck for the last 40 years. But nonetheless, I want that God should bless you. I'm out of here. I'm going home to the Lord.
Right.
They've done in 3 verses what Moses took more than 30 verses to do. But what he does is he speaks about each tribe uniquely, with one exception. Zebulun and Issachar are treated in 1 verse together. It's the only time he lumps 2 together. And what that's about, we know from the first book of Chronicles that Issachar are the people who really get what the Torah is all about. They are the ones who understand the times.
Right.
And Zebulun, we know from the end of Genesis, where Jacob blessed his 12 sons, we know that Zebulun is all about business, trade, shipping, moving around. And so the key to it is recognizing, just as Moses and Jacob said, Zebulun, your blessing is you should always be free to be able to break out of boundaries, to to bust through fences into new areas. Well, that really is the essence of business. When you think, it's an apocryphal story, but they talk about a guy who had a business in Detroit in the early 1900s. He made harnesses for horses, he made wheels for wagons, he made buggy whips, and he had no idea that a few blocks down the road, a guy called Henry Ford was building an assembly line for the Model T Ford. And he didn't realize that in the space of a year or so, because cars took off incredibly quickly, he was going to be out of business because nobody was buying bridles and nobody was buying wagon wheels. He didn't keep moving forward. And that's really a key to business. Now, Zebulun and Issachar are treated in one verse because you are only free to be able to move forward if you're simultaneously able to keep locked into the things that anchor you to reality. In other words, the more that things change, the more we need to depend on those things that never change. And so the key to business is to be able to see ahead, to recognize the soft footsteps you hear coming down the road, understanding the implications of what those will do. Sears is an example of a company, among many others, that simply didn't grasp the significance of the internet. Now, we can go back to 1848, when Samuel Morse invented the telegraph, and we can list about 20 companies that went under shortly thereafter because they failed to understand the significance that what had just happened was that we had reached the first time in human history where information could be got from one place to another faster than a man on a horse. And so we spend a lot of time on mastering, I'm not going to say prophecy, because it's not an all-seeing prophecy and being able to tell, which horse is going to win at Newmarket next Wednesday. But no, it's in your particular area, having to do with your family. Are you able to build a Noah's Ark for your family to weather the storms ahead? Are you able to see the developments that are coming down the road that are going to impact your business? Those are the things we work on, crucially important.
And it's so powerful what you're saying. So I was thinking about the innovation that made Sears so successful was the Sears catalog.
That's right.
What you would think is that having built an empire out of the ability to codify, collect, and categorize content and get it distributed in mass, that they would have seen what Jeff Bezos saw with Amazon, which is we're going to make it digitally available for everybody.
And that's such an insightful way. I love the way you've just put that. In other words, the Sears catalog of 1900 was the internet of 2000.
Exactly. And so, but this happened. I remember an article written years ago that my dad made me read from Harvard Business Review called Marketing Myopia. And it dealt with the fact that the Swiss were the masters of the clock industry. Having a Swiss watch or a Swiss clock was the goal. And they rejected, the entire digital era because they felt people would never want it digital. So they completely underestimated the power of the digital. By the way, for those that have seen the extremedreamtrip.com information there, I just had a note handed to me by my ever trusty team that I should tell you that this is a live stream you're watching now, and we're going to have Rabbi Lapin on live stream as well as our other presenters for you. And so for folks that we're already like almost sold out at the event, but people can get there, and this is a great idea. I mean, I do this myself. I don't have to pay for the hotel and the airfare and the event. I just get the live stream, and we're going to be sending information for them to be able to work right along with your rabbis so that it'll be just like they're sitting there able to absorb from you. And just want to thank you so much for your life work and what you do. And I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, that you actually go out of your way to clarify that it's okay to have hard edges on your beliefs and your thinking. We need a little bit more of that in my world because we're always apologizing for our beliefs or trying to avoid the uncomfortable subject. And that really is not the history of the prophets. That's not the history of where we came from, but it certainly is a habit we've got.
I put it this way, that one can only achieve the well-praised heights of tolerance if you're in no way handicapped by any convictions.
Wow. We can only achieve say that again.
We can only achieve the heights of tolerance that everybody loves, provided we are not handicapped by any deep conviction.
Interesting. And
yes, the way tolerance has been turned into the ultimate virtue and the ultimate value of today is laughable. It's absurd and ridiculous.
And I think this is a great conversation to have, and perhaps we'll have it in San Diego. And that is how the left has, with an insidious, we would say almost demonic wisdom, they've taken language that is biblical, like sanctuary cities, and take the idea where a person could run in the Old Testament to be able to be spared from the avenger. And we've perverted it, and the left has been brilliant at using our language. I mean, what could be more desirable than to have a choice? And so somehow choice has trumped life. And in so many ways, the bills that are being framed are ingeniously titled so that a person with low information says, well, I want to be able, the most recent one, I want to be able to have some kind of fairness, doctrine or something. So it's fair for everybody, except it ain't fair for us.
No, that's exactly right. I love how you speak about the dream trip, and while the live stream folks will really get a lot of value, I can't help thinking, after the time we've spent together on this program, that there's going to be fantastic chemistry between us. Unfortunately, that does not come through the internet. That only is evident to the folks who can feel the electricity in the room. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And I know that our collaboration in San Diego will have a profound impact. You speak about Jacob's dream as being central to the vision, don't you?
Yes, I do.
And I think that's exactly right. Even to sort of build on that point, as I was thinking about the inspiration that provides, it's kind of interesting that the verse says that in his dream, Jacob saw angels, and then we have to think for a moment. Angels are in heaven, right? So does the text say Jacob dreamed and he saw angels descending and ascending? Or does it say he dreamt and he saw angels ascending and descending? I think that it should have said, and Jacob dreamed and he saw angels coming down from heaven and going up. But it doesn't say that. It says he saw angels going up and coming down.
Come on, man.
And it's really significant, because the angels that were going up were not the ones that were coming down. The angels were going up had finished their shift. They had accompanied Jacob to that point. And now the angels were coming down to accompany him further, change of shift. But the question is, where did those angels come from that accompanied him to that point? And ancient Jewish wisdom explains that there's a very crucial word that begins that entire section, and that is that Jacob exited, he left, he departed from Beersheba, where he was. And that departure is crucial, because where we're hoping to bring attendees in San Diego is to a new level, to a new mountaintop.
Right.
You can't do that if you don't leave your existing place. And the act of leaving your existing place, because you can't change. If you're still locked into where you came from, then you're going to be like that. And the answer is, you will then do today what you did yesterday and be sure to make tomorrow just like today. But the only way to make tomorrow different is if you ensure that today is different from yesterday. You have to depart, as Jacob did, from where you were. That action of departing, of moving away from a locked-in picture and leaving it behind you and being open to new potential, that is so profound that it brings angels into your life.
That's so powerful. Everybody, I want you to share this broadcast, folks, while you're watching. Go ahead and share it, because other people need to hear this. The idea that you're talking about is the language that I've heard used when we're discussing it is the way that you exit one season determines how you enter the next. And so like the parallel for a lot of us is when the children of Israel were wandering around in the wilderness and they were grumbling and complaining, when that moment came when they could cross over into that land of promise, somehow their collective disposition was such that they couldn't cross over and go into the timing for God. In a sense, they weren't ready for the opportune moment. And so the next cycle of time, 40 years later, then Joshua comes along and he's ready to go over. And I always like how he learned something from Moses. And that was, I believe Moses had the spies deliver the report to the camp. And Joshua said, you deliver the report to me. I always wondered what he was going to do to those spies if they didn't give him what he was expecting, because he was going over. That was what his life was about.
Because it was a disaster. When it was given to the people, there was a demoralization and a complete wholesale abandonment of courage.
And so we need leaders now that can spy out the new place that God's taking us to.
And the 40 years served a very valuable purpose. We're not going to take 40 years in San Diego. We don't need it. But it's not enough. You see, leaving Egypt, getting Israel out of Egypt wasn't that hard. Getting Egypt out of Israel took 40 years. And it wasn't until everyone had died of that generation before they were ready for the new life ahead. We're not going to need to be that dramatic. But in San Diego, we're definitely going to be very much focusing on how to exit your Egypt and how to get your Egypt out of you.
You have the essence of it, my dear Rabbi. Yes. Then so there's going to be, in a sense, that's why it's an extreme dream, because if it was a comfortable dream, they would do it already. And here's what I'm telling people, and all you need to know this, that you frequently need to have outside pressure put on you for the big changes in life. There's a lot of people whose lifestyle doesn't change until they have a crisis, who don't approach finances differently until they realize that they're desperate and have to start paying bills. I believe this is going to be an extreme dream trip where people are going to be able to exit one season, enter another. I do think there's an angelic and a supernatural aspect to this. And I think it's a larger battle, Rabbi, that we need people that are, like you said, the Zebulun, the business people, and the Issachar and the Issachar tribe, the people that know God and know what's happening and know what Israel ought to do. And it's amazing to me, not to go back on this because I want to end this somehow, is that how the left, when I look at Thunder Road, Soros, the Kellogg Foundation, Tides, how the left has been able to tie their political activism and their visionaries for creating small organizations, 527s, that can be advancing 5 or 6 multiple agendas as almost like invasions of culture, and they're well funded by the left. And I'm praying that we're going to have a corresponding Zebulun-Issachar merger, that it's not too late for men and women that have resources to work with people that have insight, because people with insight need the money. And I'm sorry to say, very often the people that have the money don't really know what to do. If they did know, God
is to help people understand that we'll be focused very much on the practical. In other words, it's not just going to be theoretical and nice ideas and philosophical observations and pretty aphorisms. No, we're talking about precisely the specific steps that need to be taken in order to effectively transform a life.
That's the goal. We're looking actually for measurable action plans. When they're finished, they're actually going to come out with a one-page strategic plan for upgrading their relationships in the key areas that need to take place in order to upgrade their relationship with money, so that they have the resources to maximize the relationships. And the extreme dream is really what we say is, what has God called you to do in your lifetime? And you don't want to leave anything on the table because you played small or you were stuck in your history.
Yeah,
So,
exactly right.
So,
and look,
thank you. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's what I do. You had my website up there a little earlier, RabbiDanielLapin.com, and that really is very much the focus of what I think you are trying to achieve, what I'm trying to achieve, and the beauty of our collaboration. And I pray this won't be the last time you and I work together, because I know that we can do incredible things in helping people move out of their Egypts. You see, everybody has an Egypt. And it's important to know that in the Hebrew scriptures, names aren't just names. Every name has a meaning. And can I take 30 seconds on this?
You can. And I want to fix something. Is your domain Rabbi Daniel Lapin or Rabbi Lapin?
No, it's RabbiDanielLapin.com.
Okay, we got it up. All right.
Because there is another Rabbi Lapin who happens to be my father.
Well, thank God there's not another Lance Wallnau, or I'd be sued.
No, I'm Daniel Lapin. Rabbi Daniel Lapin is
okay.
Way to go. Because, but anyways, thanks very much for clarifying that. No, the point I wanted to make, and I've just lost my train of thought there. I'm sorry.
Oh, it'll come back.
I know we were talking about the practicality.
Yeah, I'm doing so we're going to be coming out with a one-page strategic plan, because I want the people to be able to have a strategy immediately on what they can do with their relationships. Yeah. And, an interesting thing is people feel guilty about this, but relationships have a season. And while your wife and your family are not a seasonal relationship, there are times when there are people that out of a false sense of obligations stay with relationships that are draining, disempowering, and not part of their future. And we're going to talk about that too, which is how to prune the tree so that you're giving time and energy to the relationships in this season that correspond to the purpose that God has for your life. Like I've learned, you only have a certain window with your children. You miss that one, it's kind of hard to go back and grab it later.
Absolutely.
So
Dr. Wallnau, one of the hundreds and hundreds of people who are commenting on this broadcast, a friend called Fred, reminded me what I was talking about, that names mean something. And the name Egypt in Hebrew isn't Egypt, it's Mitzrayim, which in Hebrew means a straitjacket, something that confines you. Egypt is something that prevents me from reaching the destiny that God has planned for me. That's what Egypt is.
Wow.
So Egypt could be a marital problem. Egypt could be a financial problem. Egypt could be an addiction problem. Egypt could be a health problem. But one thing I know for sure, and that is that every single one of us that'll be together in San Diego soon, every one of us has our own Egypt. Something that is holding us back, preventing us from breaking out and reaching the promised land for us. And that's what we're going to be focused on, how to get out of your Egypt so that we can move forward into, well, essentially to the mountaintop.
You got it. You have such a, I know you and I are going to be friends. And so, Rabbi, thank you again. Our tribe loves you. We have tremendous response already on the internet, and you're going to have lots of people coming to RabbiDanielLapin.com. You're going to have new friends. And for those that want to go to San Diego, people are asking, we opened up another 10 seats for people so that they can get in. And for those that can't make it, do not despair. You're going to hear 3 days of incredible content. And it's going to be all about this strategy of exiting and entering the next season in America. And actually, we've got an audience that's global. So we're in this together. And you're going to be able to watch this at your leisure. If you don't catch the broadcast, everything that Rabbi is going to be teaching, everything we're going to be talking about in Q&A will be on demand. So it's one of those great things where if you aren't there for the whole thing, don't worry about it. You could still catch it. Once again, Rabbi, I can't thank you enough. We have tons of people are asking questions. If you've got a question for the Rabbi, go ahead and leave it in your comments right now, because we're going to go over that as a staff. And we're going to have a moment when it's going to be Q&A from the live stream audience as well as those in attendance. So you'll be able to get your question in. Thank you so much again.
Well, it's wonderful being together electronically, Dr. Wallnau, and I can't tell you how eagerly I'm anticipating being together with you in person. I think that we will be able to achieve together so much more than we can achieve independently and separately. So I think San Diego is going to be life-changing for everybody.
It is, and it's at Paradise Point. Couldn't pick a more providential location.
Yeah, that's great.
For a trip to paradise. Thank you again, my friend.